Gary Galstad is a father to 4 children and a husband to a wife, Whitney Galstad. He's a family man and he's a hard worker. At the time of the incident that we represented him for, he was working as a commercial diver, which is a really busy and really interesting job. About 10 years before this incident happened, Gary and his brother decided that they were going to go to school and become commercial divers. It's a difficult process, but they went through the schooling and then they became commercial divers, and they worked all over the state and even all over the country doing this really interesting work.
What struck me about Gary right away was one of the first things I asked him was, isn't it scary being so far below the surface of the water? And he said that he actually feels more comfortable down there. And I thought that was interesting and gave me some insight into what kind of man he was.
Gary was working as a commercial diver on the 520 floating bridge project. And this project was somewhat complicated because the bridge is held up by these anchor cables that basically connect the bed of the lake to the bridge. And somewhere along the way, they decided these cables are insufficient to do the job that they were supposed to do. A construction company got together and they were working on this project to replace the cables, and Gary was hired as a diver to actually be the one who went underwater, sometimes up to, I think he said, like 100 feet underwater.
Yeah, or more.
Or more, depending on where they were in the project. And so he would dive down and he would actually detach the cables and then send them back up and replace them. So on the day of this actual incident, Gary is diving underneath this barge where the construction crew is working right above him. Gary is connected to a dive boat with an umbilical cord, and that cord basically is Gary's lifeline. It's where he gets his communications, it's where he gets his air. The construction company wanted to get moving and get onto the next barge where they were going to be doing more work, and while they were doing that, they had to disconnect a bunch of really heavy equipment, and one of those pieces of equipment was just this giant 8-foot tall spool. So they disconnected this spool, and then unfortunately gravity took over, so the spool just got thrown right into the water. And Gary got lucky because he did not get hit by the spool itself, but unfortunately the spool caught his umbilical cord and really jerked his body, and so he ended up with a significant lower back injury as a result. Like many injuries at the original onset, Gary didn't know how bad they were going to get. Pretty quickly, he realized, I have a back injury. And so eventually he had to see specialists and he had to do a lot more invasive treatments. And he ended up actually having a spinal cord stimulator implanted in his back. To some degree, it helped with the back pain that he was experiencing. But the bad thing is it has a battery pack, and so it can only be submerged in like 10 feet of water. So the same thing that sort of fixed his back, unfortunately, also ended his career as a diver. He just wanted to get better, right? That was his goal through this whole process, was to get back to diving. During the duration of this case, at no point was Gary ever released to go back to diving, and then of course with the spinal cord stimulator, he never was allowed. So he was frustrated, and they did not have it in their plans for his wife to go back to work. So I think he was feeling pretty bad that he was staying at home with the kids, and he enjoyed staying home with the kids. Like he loved to be with his children, but that just wasn't their plan. They ended up having to sell their house in Spokane and move to the Tri-Cities so they could be closer to family. It just wasn't what they had envisioned for themselves or for their family, so it was frustrating.
Initially, when Gary came to us, we didn't know who had dropped this spool onto his dive hose. There were 3 different companies that were involved in this project. It was a joint venture. And of course, initially, before any of the lawyers got involved, they all denied that they did anything or knew anything about it. But after doing probably 20 depositions of people that were there and knew something about it, we realized that every single person admitted it happened, but everybody said it wasn't me. And we thought that looked better at trial than the reverse. It looked like somebody was covering something up, which they were. The unfortunate part about all of this was that it would have been very easy for this not to have happened. When the dive tender saw the workers undoing this giant spool, he could have just said, hang on, my diver's right underneath here.
And remember, Gary has no idea what's going on above him, right? Because he's 20 or 30 feet below the water at this point. The water is murky. And so he's relying on the people above him to tell him, hey, this is unsafe. Hey, you need to watch out, something. But he doesn't get any information like that. He just is doing his job. And if people could have just taken 10 minutes and just waited for Gary to get done, because he was that close to being done, all of this could have been avoided.
The defenses in this case were things that we normally see in personal injury cases and maritime cases across the board, and that is first that it didn't happen, or if it did happen, it didn't happen the way the injured person says it happened. But what they did argue was that it didn't actually hit Gary or his hose, and it just fell into the water and no harm done. We were able to prove them wrong by doing 20 or so depositions of people under oath to determine that yes, this thing happened, and yes, it hit his hose and it yanked him back with a lot of force.
And on that note, there was some testimony that made it clear that Gary was hurt right at the scene. So he had kind of gotten onto the dive boat and he laid flat on his back for a while, and it was clear to his team that he was not okay. He made an incident report right away. He started seeing doctors pretty quickly. So it was very obvious, if you looked at all of the evidence like we did, Gary was clearly hurt. So that argument didn't hold any water.
We were able to force the defendant's insurance companies to pay $3 million about 1 month before trial. The reason that they finally offered a fair sum of money is because they knew we were ready to try this case. We had everything set up and ready to go, all our witnesses in line, experts lined up. We were ready to try this case, and they came up with an appropriate amount of money to settle it.
It really changed the Galstad family's lives. So this finally put them in a position where they could kind of reevaluate what was Gary going to be able to do in the future for work. He had to retrain to do something different because he obviously could no longer work as a diver or any physical job. So with this money, they were able to sort of reset and begin to look forward for the first time in many years.
Over the course of a couple of years of knowing him and knowing the family, we got to know them as if they were friends of ours, and they were friends of ours. And so to be able to get them compensation and see that they had a path forward that worked for them in life was very satisfying to everybody here at GLP that worked on the case.
Getting that kind of a result for Gary, that's why we do what we do. Because we get to help people who are often experiencing some of the worst times of their lives. And to see Gary's family sort of be put right really is a great feeling.
The result in this case represents one of the core values here at GLP Attorneys, which is collaboration. So this was not just handled by myself and Sarah. There were paralegals, there were legal assistants, there were other people in the firm, other attorneys we consulted with in our firm that helped put this case together and be able to get it resolved as well as we did. What separates GLP Attorneys from some of the other firms in the community is that we don't back down, and the insurance companies know that we don't back down. This case really speaks to the work that GLP Attorneys does and the care that we give to each of our clients. There are some law firms in Washington State that will settle a case short. They'll settle a case on the second or third offer and move on to the next project they have. But not here at GLP Attorneys. We fought until the insurance company knew that they had no choice but to put every dollar on the table and see if it would resolve the case. And they did. We did the kind of work that we're proud of and the kind of work that we do on every single case, which is fight as hard as we can and be the strongest advocate we can for our clients.